Right, so episode 2 of the ADHD UK Science Podcast.
How exciting.
Very exciting. And Anna Butura has joined us today. So if you just introduce yourself and we'll talk about your research interest in ADHD and take it from there.
Hey, so I'm Anna Maria, or Anna for short. I am a PhD student at King's College London. I am Edmund Sanuga Barks PhD student, to be more exact. And I am in my third year. It's a 4-year PhD, so I'm nearly there. I can see the finish line. And my PhD focuses on ADHD in girls and women. And I specifically am looking at the masking phenomena. So kind of trying to see whether the fact that the girls with ADHD are being diagnosed late, if that is due to them masking their ADHD symptoms. And we're looking at that in a few studies in loads of different ways. So that's a kind of general idea.
Well, I mean, what ways are you looking into it? What are the methods you're using? What are the kind of ways of looking at this question? In fact, it might be worth, before we ask that question, just to quickly describe what you understand by masking.
Okay, so I guess that was the masking in ADHD specifically hasn't really been researched much. So I think we kind of went into it knowing more about masking in terms of autism rather than ADHD. I think from my perspective, what I see masking to be comes from personal experience and experience from friends and kind of growing up with ADHD myself. So I went into it with a different view on it than maybe what the research out there is. And we've kind of looked at that in our first few studies. So we now know a bit more about how it looks like in ADHD based on the first study that we did. So we did a qualitative study, which is basically interviews, very long interviews with women that have a diagnosis of ADHD and their family members. I'm not sure if you want me to go into that a bit more.
Oh, very much do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the interviews that we did, that I did at the start of my PhD, was kind of the start of everything. So we wanted to hear directly from women with ADHD, and from there we basically went into loads of different avenues. So the interviews were very, very open. We wanted to find out, literally just talk to women with ADHD, and kind of talk to them about their life stories. So I interviewed 30 women with ADHD and 30 family members, mostly mothers. And we asked them about their experiences, life experiences. So pre-diagnoses, how they kind of describe themselves from a very young age up until now, their difficulties, their strengths, their experiences, getting a diagnosis, the clinical experience, their school experience, why they think that they got an early diagnosis or a late diagnosis. So pretty much everything that you can cover. And out of that, we didn't go into it with structured questions because we wanted to find out what was important to them. And out of that came a lot of masking. So after we analyzed it, we looked at all the themes and things like that came out of it. And without asking any masking questions specifically, the topic of masking came up.
It spontaneously arose.
In most of, if not all of the transcripts, the interviews, basically. So to kind of answer your first question about what we think now masking looks like in ADHD, we're still kind of trying to separate it because from ADHD from autism, because a lot of the women that I interviewed also had comorbid autism. So it was, but we can see a slight difference between the way that girls with ADHD mask and girls with autism mask, and that revolves mostly around social aspects. So it seems like the masking that happens in ASD is a lot more socially what's the word motivated. So they kind of maybe are a bit more, they seclude themselves, or they hide certain aspects about their character, so that not to feel embarrassed, or in kind of social situations, or maybe they try to mimic other people. So if someone says something in a certain way, they try to copy that. So they things like that, basically. Whereas with ADHD, there is a element of that, but it mostly revolves around hiding ADHD symptoms. So hyperactivity, for example, especially well, obviously we just interviewed girls, but things like if in a school environment, for example, and they really need to move, and they need to get up, and they have this kind of urge of moving, instead of doing it as we know boys are more likely to do. They would get up and they would be a bit more disruptive. Girls don't tend to do that. They tend to do it in a more socially acceptable way. So asking to go to the toilet a lot, asking to be kind of like a teacher's pet, in air quotations,
Be the
and
person that hands out all the papers at the front.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of doing things in a socially acceptable way, and this is either conscious or subconscious. I've spoken to the women, and they said, some of them said, I've never really realized that that's what I was doing, but now looking back at all of the teacher reports, they were saying, because they had to go through them for their diagnoses and things like that. And they were saying, oh, my teacher said that I was going to the toilet like 8 times a day, and I had to get checked up to see if I had like a urine infection, and I didn't really need to go.
I've seen that in clinic. Yeah.
Why are you going to the toilet so much? I don't even need to go to the toilet. And so loads of these kind of things, and they obviously, looking retrospectively, you kind of piece things together, and you're like, oh, that's why, because I needed to move and I didn't know how. So masking tends to be more around those types of things, with attention as well, rather than kind of admitting that you haven't heard what the teachers said. You either ask the person next to you, or you specifically place yourself in situations where that you will have that kind of benefit. So sitting next to a someone that will have loads of notes down, so that you can kind of copy them, or trying to catch up a lot, so that the teacher doesn't notice that you haven't missed out, or things like that, basically.
The amount of time I spend just copying my friends' notes in lessons is outrageous.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe also placing yourself in social groups that kind of match your character in a way. So, and this is quite different, I think, to autism. I think autism, girls with with ASD, they try to almost change themselves to fit in with others. Whereas I think with ADHD, and what came up quite a lot is, if you are very, very hyperactive, girls will more likely hang out with boys, or they will more likely be in sports groups and things like that. I completely understand that, because I was the exact same. I would just not have friends that were girls. I would just be surrounded by boys all the time, and always be in the basketball court, and always and so, and that seems to be more the case, where they just try to surround themselves with people that are like them, so that they kind of don't be this kind of outcast. So that's what we've found so far, which is really, really interesting. But from this data, we are now trying to separate the ADHD masking traits and the autism masking traits, obviously they overlap a lot, but I think there are some differences, which is really interesting. And hopefully we are going to create a masking tool, the first masking tool for ADHD. There is already one for ASD, but I've now created a questionnaire, kind of screening tool that will hopefully be published very soon.
Amazing.
So that's very
Tess,
exciting.
you've been poised for some time, which
Sorry,
is very unlike you.
Do you think that the overlaps between masking in girls with ADHD and girls with autism is because of some of the overlaps in symptoms between the two conditions?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why we didn't make a point about like only recruiting girls or women just with ADHD, because in real life, obviously, most women do have overlapping symptoms, even if they don't have a diagnosis of ASD. So I think whilst it is important to separate those just to see where it kind of comes from, at the same time, I think it's quite hard to completely separate them, because most of us with ADHD also have those other symptoms. So I do think that's probably the reason.
And how did your interviewees' experience, how did it compare to your own experience? You've mentioned that you grew up with ADHD. I suppose I'm slightly turning this round to interview for your story, because I'm very interested to know what that is.
Yeah. So I got diagnosed quite late. It was about 15 years old is when I got initially picked up, and then it took quite a while for me to get treatment. I only started treatment at 20, and that was because it took me quite a while to accept the diagnosis. Which, yeah, I think I definitely masked a lot, and I see that in my school reports. I see it in what families say, and I think only now am I starting to really in a way not do that, because I'm accepting myself as a woman with ADHD rather than trying to mold myself to fit into society. But anyway, that's another rant. But yeah, so I got diagnosed as many girls do around that time, late teenage years, and I just kind of dealt with it for a very, very long time by myself, not really understanding myself, not really getting understood, I guess, by family members and things like that. But I guess that's how I got into ADHD research. But it was quite random. So I did psychology A levels, and then I went and I did a bachelor's in psychology. And I really, really wanted to go and do a clinical doctorate. I think being a clinician has always been on my list. Research wasn't really on it, so I kind of fell into it. I met Edmund. I was going to do a master's dissertation with him, and we got on super, super well. He obviously has ADHD, as you know, and yeah, we just spoke for hours.
Well, he was a bit, when he came on the podcast, he was a bit circumspect about saying that in that many words. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. Just to cut in, I mean, we all know who Edmund is, but Edmund Sunuga is, I think he's probably the most, he's probably the most important ADHD researcher I think we've got in the UK at the moment.
Check out our podcast episode.
I've looked
at it. I've had a look at it. Here, actually.
It's quite revealing anyway. So I think it was I think it was a great episode, and anyway, just so everyone knows who he is.
You mentioned the model that you use for the masking. What kind of stuff is like on there? What kind of, like, what does that entail?
You mean the questionnaire thing? The tool?
Yeah.
It basically separates, so we came up with, out of the masking, we came up with 3 or 4, I should have a look more at that, but 3 or 4 different types of masking. And that's this like social element, and then suppressing your symptoms, which is literally just like, if you, instead of getting up and moving, you sit on your hands to just stop fiddling, and things like that. Suppressing your symptoms, adapting your situation to fit in with your symptoms, and this I guess, yeah, adapting your actions to be socially acceptable. So they all fit under those categories, and it's for children. So it's a self-report for children and teenagers. I also really want to do one for adults. I think it's the categories are the same. It's just the way that they've been phrased. So for example, for children now is I ask for permission to go to the toilet instead of just standing up and moving about, kind of things around those things. Or I like playing with boys more than I do with girls, or things like that. Whereas with adults, that would be slightly different, in terms of just works and yeah.
Do you have any kind of feeling or insight, either from your own experience or from the interviews, about the impact of masking and why masking matters?
I guess so. I think that's why, that's the reason I'm doing this PhD. I think so. If you mask your symptoms, one, you are putting so much pressure on yourself to be this sort of person that you think is socially acceptable. And I think you kind of stray away from who you really are, and it's so much more effort trying to be this other person than it is being yourself. And that comes with so many complications, like once you first of all, if you don't accept yourself for who you are, you don't ask for help, you don't ask for support, instead of getting breaks as you normally would. So, I know I work in the clinic once or twice a week. And once children get a diagnosis of ADHD, that is in their EHCP, their educational healthcare plan, that they will have a break every 30 minutes, and that's accepted. And that's something that, children with ADHD should get. But if you don't have that, then you have to make up your own excuses, or you have to suppress your symptoms and things like that, and that's never a good thing. It distracts you from your work. You can't do your work properly. You can't, you're missing lessons because you're going to the toilet so much, things like that. So I think it definitely impacts your education. Also, it doesn't let your teachers and your parents know that you need support. They think that, oh, she's coming in with her homework done completely, and she's ticking all of these tasks, but really they don't know how many hours and sleepless nights have gone into doing that homework. I used to do that a lot. I used to try to catch up during the night. So I mean, first of all, I had insomnia for years and years, so I wouldn't be able to sleep anyway. But that was when I was catching up on work. I was doing hours and hours during the night trying to do my homework, because a simple 20-minute task would take me 2-3 hours, and it was so hard. But if I knew that it was okay to be like that because I had ADHD, then I could maybe get some help from school. I could get a TA to help me, or I could, and I didn't have to have all those sleepless nights doing it. So I was hiding my symptoms from my teachers. I was hiding my difficulties from my parents. Nobody knew what was going on with me. And I think there's just as a child, there's so much, weight on your shoulders to keep all of that to yourself. And first of all, think that something's wrong with you, that you're different to all of your peers and you don't know why. I think it's a lot. And also, this kind of maps onto my next study, the biggest study of them all. The idea that the older you get, the harder it is to mask. So in primary school, those, yes, you still have, you still struggle, and you still find it hard to manage your social relationships and things like that. But I think in primary school it is easier to mask your difficulties. That's our hypothesis anyways. And so we think that that's why girls are not getting picked up in these early years, because they don't have all of those increase, that the demand is still quite low. And so when they move on to secondary school, they start having relationships and they have complicated social lives, and they start, maybe they also get their period, so hormones come into play as well. That they have GCSEs, they have A levels, and it's so much harder to manage all of that. That masking and that ability to mask drops, and then you have mental health difficulties, because you have tried to suppress all of these things all for years and years and years. And so depression, anxiety, other complications start to kick in. Eating disorders, all of these make it so much harder to mask. And then usually you would then end up in a CAMS or in a mental health service, and then you get picked up by them, and then they say, oh, actually, it's not depression, anxiety in this, it's actually ADHD that's hidden. And that's usually how they get kind of picked up. That was my case anyway, and many women that I've spoken to. So I think masking is very detrimental to the individual, but also when they actually do get picked up, it's their presentation is it's so complicated by loads of these other things that is harder to unpick what is ADHD, what is some everything else. So yeah.
But I was just asking you how that idea that masking is more difficult in secondary than primary, how that fits in with your experience.
Well, I think
you, Anna, of course.
My experience, I didn't really have to mask much in primary school. Yeah, in my experience, it was a lot easier Well, I didn't really have to mask in primary school, because I could kind of get away with a lot of the stuff, because they kind of thought I was being dramatic or I was having a tantrum or something. And then when you get to secondary school and I hit year 7, 8, 9, I started realizing, I do need to compress this. And I started doing that, and it really, really exhausted me. In year 9, 10, I was not feeling great at all, because I had to learn all of a sudden how to compress some of the fundamental stuff that makes me who I am. And that was really upsetting. And then, so I think that I can definitely see that, because you're younger, you don't really need to. Do you think it's partially linked into the fact that you don't need to mask as much, as well as the fact that it's easier to, because you have less to manage?
I mean, that seems to me not alternative, but that's the other thing that's going on, is that is that primary schools are just much more tolerant of these behaviours.
Yes, I think there's multiple things going on. I think one, you probably don't need to mask as much because you're not struggling as much. So there's a few papers out there that kind of suggest this, but they suggest that girls with ADHD have a higher threshold to present. So they basically need to struggle a lot more for the ADHD symptoms to present than boys do. And I think that plays quite well, that kind of goes quite well with this masking phenomena, that they start to mask later on in secondary school, because that's when the demands that's not what I meant. The demands increase. So even in year 7, really, that's still quite young. I think when it's in secondary school is when it all kind of hits the fan. When you move, when you move.
We haven't worked out a swearing policy for this podcast. Anyway, it's fine. We don't have to worry about it right this minute.
Arse.
Oh no, we should be in good trouble with Henry and the team at ADHD UK. Never mind.
Oh well. Sorry.
We're very edgy broadcasters. Anyway, right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've started to unmask slightly recently, which might be because of A-level stress, because I've just started year 12, and I've kind of shifted from a more female-dominated friend group to a much more male-dominated friend group, and I still have female friends, but you know, the main people who dominate this friend group are male, and every single lunchtime we're at the shops, we're running around near the river. Whereas in my old friend group, we've just kind of sat around a table, and I love them. They're such lovely girls, but I just couldn't stand just being sat there.
Right. That's
And
interesting.
and then I saw this other friend group with a bunch of people who I like, and they were going out and they were getting food and they were chucking bread at each other and picking it up afterwards, save the environment. And I was like, come on, get in. That's me. And then that's where I ended up.
Interesting. That's so interesting.
And there was no harsh feelings towards the
No,
others. Like
no.
I'm still good with them, but it's just I feel like the environment just was a lot better for me. And strangely, I feel like I'm more relaxed doing this dumb stuff than I was just sitting and chatting.
Well, there is a kind of, I think, stereotypical view that I think in my experience, women almost what's the word? They almost internalize themselves that relaxing means sitting and chatting. Do you see what I mean?
That's
And
true.
having
I did
conversations.
literally just do that.
Yeah. This idea that if you're running around, it's not relaxing. Well, but who says?
Well, it's not physically relaxing, but like emotionally.
I think there's also, yes, it is internalized, but I think it's important to ask where that comes from. And we have kind of started to ask those questions because of the interviews that we did. A lot of the themes also kind of revolved around where does this all come from? Why do girls mask maybe more than boys? And I think what we've come to is from the interviews, but also our own interpretations, is how girls are socialized and how they are differently socialized to boys. And I think
all of my A-level subjects now.
Amazing.
Sociology
It's
as
like
well.
a field
So
trip.
I know. Great. Sorry, carry on.
yeah, and a lot of the women said, the same thing, that they as from young, girls, they asked their parents. I specifically remember now one girl, she said that she would be at school and she would have all of this pent up um, emotion and hyperactivity and all of that, because that she couldn't really display at school because she would either get told off, or she would be called too bossy, or she would be called too crazy. And then she would go home and she specifically said, I would go home and I would punch my pillows for hours and hours. And I asked my parents to do boxing classes, but they said that I was a girl and that I wasn't allowed to do boxing because I'm a girl and I should do ballet, or things like that. So she was Greek, so different culture, but also I think it happens very much everywhere. And I think it's quite unconscious for many parents. Without realizing, we do socialize girls differently to boys, and whether that's calling very outgoing girls bossy or controlling or loud, and kind of trying to make them take up less space in a way. I think it's an experience that has been going on for many women and many years. And even now, I think it's a bit maybe less because we're more aware of how that impacts girls. But I think especially with girls that are not stereotypically girls, they don't like to sit and chat, or I don't know, just do more calm things. They think that that's not what being a lady is like.
It's not
And so
feminine in some weird, in some odd way.
Did you feel like you got that a lot? Because I know that obviously being raised in a family with two brothers and you,
Hello.
I was never really
And him.
Yeah, I never really had that massively put onto me. So do you feel like that was quite a big thing when you were growing up?
I think I've discussed this quite a lot recently. because I'm taking on a project at the moment where I'm converting a van all by myself, and I'm doing a lot of that stuff. And so I think since starting that, I've been met with a lot of kind of, oh, but like, do you know how to cut a piece of wood? Do you know how to screw in? Do you know how to do?
God.
Like
You
I
said
had,
you
but
did
like,
say
who's
van.
trusting?
Did you say a
Yeah,
van?
van.
Yeah, sorry,
Yes,
okay.
van.
Oh,
Yes,
I've
sorry.
seen so many videos of people doing those. It
It's a
sounds
sort of
absolutely
George
lovely.
Clark's Amazing Spaces kind of thing.
Yeah, it is. I love that show.
You love that show.
Yeah, so I've been met with a lot of those kind of remarks, like who's trusting you with all of these power tools and things like that. And I think those remarks, they come a lot from my extended family, my uncles and things like that.
I
Whereas
almost said, yeah, thanks, uncle.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But luckily, I didn't experience that in my immediate family. I have an older brother, and I feel like growing up, me and him were treated very, very equally. I didn't get any sort of different treatment or expectation, so that really, really helped. My parents are extremely supportive in everything I do, and even if they try to treat me in a different way, I've growing up anyway, I had such a huge personality, and I was very, very what's the word? I forgot the word now. I basically did not accept authority. What's that?
Assertive. Is assertive the word? Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I was assertive. I was defiant. I was everything you would think of
Oppositional. I've heard that phrase in
oppositional.
clinic
Yeah,
probably
I was
quite a
very
lot.
oppositional. Yeah.
Oppositional.
Explain the reference.
So oppositional defiant disorder is a condition. Okay, it's a label that children with ADHD often get, and children without ADHD often get. And so it basically means it's kind of a child who won't do stuff and just kind of yells at people and like, no, I'm not doing it, or I'm just not going to go there, or it's resisting adult control, and it's something that's very, very common in primary school kids, and often in secondary school then kids then progresses to something we would call more of a conduct disorder, where you're going out of your way to stick two fingers up at the adult world. So you're truanting, you're fire setting, you're getting involved in
Anti-school subcultures.
Anti-school subcultures, anti-social subcultures. So my problem is I don't really like labeling children as oppositional defiant disorder, because it places the problem in the child, whereas most obviously, well, in my experience clinically, the problem is in a relationship between the child and their environment. Sorry, that's me basically going on a soapbox for a minute, but is that a reasonable? Does it make sense? And is it a reasonable summary?
There's kids who don't really like being told what to do.
Yeah, and for ADHD kids, they often just it's a bit of a simplification, but often they just kind of at some level realize, I can't be good. These demands you're placing on me, I can't do it, and so they get oppositional.
So do you think that comes up a lot more with girls? Because I feel like this is a bit like of a wide statement, but I feel like generally there is a lot more of those expectations placed on women and girls.
I think it probably plays out. Let's go back to Hannah, because otherwise
that's what the question was to her. But, I'm not asking you about your experience as a woman.
No, but I have experience of girls.
Well, I think actually it's probably the other way around. I mean, there are loads of expectation on girls, yes, but I think this is another theme that has come up, people pleasing, and that maps in quite well with masking. They want to people please so much that even if they find it really, really, really difficult to to kind of reach those expectations, to fulfill those expectations, they will do anything to please their teachers, to please their parents. This also, like, rejection sensitivity, being very, having a very minor criticism will completely send them into crying fits, and destroy their self-esteem and things like that. So that is such a like massive theme that has come up as well, this really, really intense need to people please, and very, very sensitive to rejection, that I think they will do anything to kind of reach those expectations, even if it means destroying their sleep and destroying their mental health. But what you were saying about this being a reaction to their environment, I think I really saw the difference in the way that my environment. So at home, for example, my parents, they weren't very, very strict. They definitely tried to discipline me in some ways, but it was not like at school. And so I wasn't as defiant, and I wasn't as kind of oppositional at home, because my parents managed me in a completely different way than at school. At school, I was this, very, very hard to manage teenager. Whereas at home, I wasn't. I think that really, shows kind of, it's not really how about the child or the person with ADHD. It's how you deal with them, and how you manage them, and understand them, and talk to them, and communicate with them.
And actually, just to go quickly back to the oppositional behaviour, you probably have less oppositional behaviour in girls, but particularly up until secondary, because of this people pleasing, but the feelings are still there, the anger is still there. There's all of those kind of self-esteem issues are still there, but they just get turned inwards. I'm going to pause because. So what I was going to ask you was, one of the things that's tricky particularly when I see somebody who perhaps at home is exhibiting quite a few ADHD symptoms, when I see them in clinic as a sort of doctor, a sort of doctor, an actual doctor, it's very difficult, because it feels to me often like they are masking, and this probably is more common in girls, particularly early, sort of late primary, early secondary school. What would be the implications of your work for a clinician sitting there going, well, it looks like they might have ADHD, but the school are reporting that they're no trouble at all. They're quite chatty, but other than that, they're fine. Those sorts of things.
Yeah. So I think so that's another. Well, I think overall that's pretty much the biggest finding so far from the qualitative work, but also other research that we've done that has just confirmed that. Basically, that girls seem to be masking at school, but not at home. And we have seen that in the qualitative piece of work. That was the first time we saw this huge difference in the way that they described themselves at home compared to the way they described themselves at school. And also when we talked to the family members, the mums were saying that they were having so much trouble, because at home, they were finding it really, really hard to do their homework, and they were not sleeping, and they came home with so much anger, and they were just crying, and they can't manage them. And then they try to contact the GP, or they try to go and ask for a diagnosis of something, and then they go to school, and it's like, no, she's absolutely perfect, there's absolutely nothing going on whatsoever. And this has been a very, very common situation in the interviews. And so from that, we then decided that the questionnaire, so we've made 2 questionnaires out of those interviews. One of the questionnaires was this kind of female specific sort of self-report ADHD questionnaire. So basically, it was a questionnaire that children could take that asked them about their ADHD characteristics. This was based on the interviews, and this wasn't just this wasn't just the 18 DSM items. So that surround hyperactivity, activity, attention, and impulsivity. This was everything: emotional dysregulation, everything. And so that was the one questionnaire. And then the second one was this masking questionnaire that we created. in the ADHD characteristics questionnaire, we decided to make a home and a school one. So in one questionnaire, they had like two columns. One was home, one was school. And it makes sense, really, because they are in both situations. They are the only person that could answer how they behave and how they feel at home and at school.
Oh, I see. So this is because I'm so used to these questionnaires being answered by the adults about the child. So it's the young person. Let's call them young person. Um, Answering about how they behave, how they feel at home, and how they. That's really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And there is,
Yeah, I know.
yeah,
Sorry.
sorry, I should have made that a bit more clear. Yeah, I think, and
No, it's just that
it
I'm
is
old and
difficult
don't
to
really
see
listen.
yeah, it's difficult um to kind of conceptualize that, because that's what we know at the moment. When you diagnose a child, you ask the parents and you ask the teachers, but nobody has ever asked the child, the young person, how do you feel, and I think it's quite a common belief that that children and young people are not capable of talking about their own feelings and their own being kind of like self-reflective. But there is new research, and there are a few papers that are older as well, that show the exact opposite. Children as young as 8, 9, even younger, they can talk very, very detailed about how they feel, given if they are asked the right answers, the right questions. Sorry. So that's why we thought it was important to, yes, get the questions from teachers and parents, but also talk to the young people themselves. And we gave this questionnaire to about 500, 600 children in primary schools, and this is very, very preliminary analysis, but we saw quite a difference in the way that girls reported their characteristics at home based on school. So they had higher ADHD symptoms, self-reported ADHD symptoms at home than they did at school, whereas boys didn't. There was still that difference, but the difference was much smaller.
Yeah, I was going to ask. That was the question that I was going to ask. Was
Hooray!
Yeah, hooray! I finally remembered. The question I was going to ask was whether that was also something that you noticed in the interviews, because I've heard about it a lot, about the difference between how the way that a young woman will act at school and at home. And obviously, this isn't exclusive to young women, but it's mostly young women. So I was wondering if that was something that had come up a lot in the interview.
Yeah, it did, and that was the main reason why we decided to separate this questionnaire into home and school, to see whether that was followed. Was so I think so that's really, really interesting. And I think going back to the clinical implication, at the moment, an ADHD diagnosis is made if the symptoms are present in two environments, home and school. If this masking phenomena is so is impacting the way that they present, such like with such significance, then this is kind of a huge thing in the clinical world, because how are we meant to diagnose girls if they don't present at school? This changes how we look, how we diagnose girls massively. So I think this masking tool could be really, really useful, if done right, and if it picks up these girls, if it picks up the traits that we want to look for. If these girls are coming into clinics and clinicians see, well, they do present at home, but they don't really present at school, then they could use this tool to see, if they do show these signs, and they could then start asking more questions. Are we actually seeing them for who they are, or is there something more that we should look for? And I think that's when maybe more objective tools should be used. That's something else also that I'm looking at. I'm using the QB test. I don't know if you've heard of the QB test, but it's an objective measure of ADHD symptoms.
There's a
So I
few things
think,
to unpack. There's a few things to unpack of all
yeah,
of that.
sorry.
So let's go to the QB
Very,
test.
very interesting.
Let's go to the QB test first.
Yeah, what is that?
It's if you imagine playing the world's most boring video game. So it's excruciating. I did it
I was
years
going to
ago.
say a video game name then, but I don't want the hate. So.
So it's basically a screen pops up and you either have to press a button or not press a button, depending on what you see. And sometimes it sort of encourages you to press a button when you shouldn't, which is how it kind of measures impulsivity. And you do the whole thing.
That's one of the games in Dumb Ways to Die.
Pretty much. I mean, anyway, yeah. But it just
Why?
goes on and on and on forever, and it's completely, well, it doesn't go on forever, obviously, but it felt like when I did it.
Simon Says.
It's a little bit, yes, I see it's a little bit like Simon Says.
God,
yeah.
that is boring.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, it used to be that you had to wear something. I think now that they just detect how much you're moving while you're supposed to be sitting still in front of this laptop.
They still do that. They're working on changing that, but I think the system is a bit more complicated than they probably anticipated. But yeah, you still have to wear this kind of reflective ball on your head, and there's a infrared camera that looks at you and marks your activity.
And I have to declare an interest because I'm deeply skeptical. It seems to be very much the rage locally, and everyone wants to spend lots of money on it. And I'm deeply skeptical that it can help in more than a few cases. I think that having said that, the masking girls may be a subgroup of the overall ADHD population where it is helpful. But I see it as very much. It is very much. There's a lot of enthusiasm for it at very high levels of the NHS, and I think it costs a lot of money to put it into a service, and you always have to lose staff in order to put it in place. Anyway, sorry, that's another slight aside, but I get into arguments with people about it. So.
Yeah, I think personally, I think it's useful to pick up these girls that like that if you see that there's a difference in the way that teachers describe them and the way that parents describe them. Those are very subjective views of how this young person is experiencing things. And so when you get an objective objective measure like this, it's very, very useful because QB test is really sensitive to movement. And I have worked with it hours and hours and hours. And, I tried to sit as still as I could and just move a little toe or move a little finger and it picks it up. And I think with girls that they really, really try to suppress their behavior and their activity, or their activities are a lot less, like just fidgeting with the fingers or, doing other very small movements, it picks up micro events with a lot of sensitivity. So I think it's really useful in that in that situation where you don't really know who to believe, and I think QB test can be used quite useful.
Also,
in that situation.
I feel like a teacher has got about 30 different students to look at, and I'm assuming that most parents don't have about 30 children. So
old Mother Hubbard did.
Thank you, Dad. And so I feel like if a girl is masking, you're a lot less likely to notice the little things that might be hints, because there's a whole class of people to keep track of.
Yeah, of course.
And maybe there's like boys with ADHD who aren't suppressing them at all, who are much more noticeable.
Yeah,
and those are the ones you're paying attention to, rather than the little girl, the girl in the corner who's fidgeting with her pen. And
exactly.
That's the least of your worries at that point. But if you're a parent and you're at home, and it's your child, you're more likely to notice that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, and it is. I think I really like what you said, that it's where there's a disparity and there's uncertainty, because one of the things that there's a reason why we have always had as a rule that you have to have ADHD symptoms across 2 settings as a part of the criteria for having the diagnosis, because particularly in younger children, there are children who behave in a very dysregulated, let's use this, we'll go back to what dysregulated means, because I think it's important, you've mentioned it, behave in a very dysregulated way, often quite angry and appear to be hyperactive and have ADHD features at home, but it's not due to ADHD. It's due to some often trauma or relationship difficulties, or something more relational and interpersonal than a neurodevelopmental condition. So that, just to explain, if people are kind of listening and going, well, why on earth do they need to have this stupid rule that it has to be across two
That's
places?
what I'm thinking.
Yeah, well, fine. That's the reason.
Also, people might want to act like that because of their friend group, and people in their friend group act like that, like if they're at school.
Sure. So triangulating the two out, the theory is, because it's a neurodevelopmental condition, it is present in all settings because you are present in all settings. And so you should see some symptoms. You won't see exactly the same behaviors.
That is
but
quite two-dimensional.
You should see some, but even one-dimensional. You should see some similarity between the behaviors. That's the argument. I think this is really challenging to that argument. I don't think it's not just because we've always done it like that. There are reasons why we do it like that conventionally, but we may need to rethink and have the kind of thinking that you're doing, in terms of, well, there are a proportion of people where we have to try some way to get an objective way forward, or use something like a masking questionnaire to pick up those where this is happening.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing that I was thinking of, and this is for future research, but when I was recruiting for my studies, I came across this was when I was recruiting for the children in primary school to do the questionnaires, and loads of parents came back to me. They really wanted their child to participate in all sorts of things. But there was this group of parents that asked me, well, my child is homeschooled, and can they still participate? Obviously, they couldn't, because I was looking at this difference between home and school. But I spoke to a few of those parents, and we had a kind of half an hour to an hour chat about their experiences. And I asked them, why are you homeschooling them? Is there any reason for that? And what is the difference between their kind of behavior at home and at school, or sorry, when they were at school and now that they're at home. And actually the biggest reason why they decided to homeschool their children, their girls in particular, was because they started seeing a massive behavior shift as they got older. They started to become a lot more secluded. They started to have anxiety and all of these different things. And they said when they started to homeschool them, this changed, and they didn't really see much of that behavior difference, and their personality kind of developed in a different way. And so I would be really, really interested to see whether girls that are just homeschooled, if their masking traits differ from girls in school environments. I think that would be really interesting. But yeah, with the very few parents that I've talked to, it seems like there's something there.
I mean, yeah, the homeschooled, my experience of the homeschooling kind of community, the families who I work with who have been homeschooled, I mean, obviously it's very challenging diagnostically, but that's an aside. But very few of them have chosen it as a kind of lifestyle choice. It's because things have gone really very badly wrong, and they felt it was best for their child. I think that's misunderstood about people who homeschool, I think. We've mentioned a couple of times emotional dysregulation, and I talked about dysregulated behavior. It might be worth just unpacking a little bit on what that is, and what you understand by it, and how important it is.
Yes. So emotional dysregulation is basically not being able to regulate your emotions. So having these kind of over or under reactions to things. So I think in my qualitative research, the interviews that I mentioned, emotional dysregulation came up in every single participant I talked about. And so that was are very, very interesting, but I guess not surprising given, how much research there is out there that indicates, how important emotional dysregulation is in people with ADHD. But it revolved, I guess, different types of emotions. So anger was something that was quite prominent. So, this feeling of anger and not really knowing what to do with it. I think, and that kind of revolved around frustration, being really, really frustrated in, not being understood or not being able to, voice your thoughts, or not being able to put your thoughts into words and things like that. Loads of frustration and anger around your ADHD and how that presents, but also just the high end of that is when you get very, the smallest kind of positive, that would happen. So when you get happy, you get very, very, very happy, and you just can't contain that. And there's two kind of extremes. I've definitely experienced that my entire life. I think I'm a bit better now with medication, kind of trying to manage that. But when I get angry, I get very angry. When I get happy, I get very happy. And that's, very, very difficult, I think, for a teenager when, you just a neurotypical teenager has, difficulty with kind of just, hormones and things going around that add emotional dysregulation to all of that. That's even more difficult to manage. So I think that the issue with that is that, I guess, with people with ADHD, they feel like they are a teenager their entire life. They don't really.
Hooray!
Yeah. I
That's
think that's the annoying thing. But I guess it does get easier as with more support and maybe medication and things as you get older. But yeah, I think emotional dysregulation is something that is really, really important, and I really, really think that it should be considered um um as something to support people with, because I don't think that it's something that is really looked at in terms of like, okay, now you have a diagnosis, we help you with your main ADHD symptoms, attention, hyperactive, medication, but what about everything else? How do we, if emotional dysregulation is such an important thing that people struggle with throughout their life, it's something that should be considered when giving support. But also growing up, how do you manage children that have these massive tantrums or cry for absolutely no reason, or
you tell
it's
me.
hard. Yeah. So I think it's something that should be considered a lot more.
Yeah.
No, it does, and I think obviously the argument is, well, it's not specific to ADHD, so we can't make a diagnostic criteria. But that doesn't mean it's not important. We should. It doesn't. That's not an argument for not asking about it, addressing it. And I've just been thinking to myself, I don't even know. And I've been doing ADHD for a long time, and it's ashamed to say, I don't even know if there's a validated measure, a proper measure for emotional dysregulation, because we just don't think about it, and we should.
I feel like in combination with masking as well, I feel like a
Yeah,
lot of
exactly.
it is a lot of the minimal emotion stuff is over masking, where you kind of have these intense emotions and you kind of overdo the masking. But I'm not saying that's what it is all the time.
No, I know. I'm
'Cause
sorry,
I
that
feel
was
like
my interested face, not my.
I
What are you talking about, Test face?
because you know this. Okay, come on.
No, that was my. What are you talking
Okay,
about, Test
okay,
face?
thank you. Yeah, I like used to and still do struggle with emotional dysregulation.
Yeah,
Quite a lot of the
sure.
time, when I would have these really minimal reactions, it wasn't because this could just be me and not like a more general thing. It wasn't because the reactions themselves were small. It's because I was trying so unbelievably hard to keep these big old emotions inside.
Yeah.
I was kind of overdoing it a bit.
Yeah, I know.
And I don't know if that's a more general thing or just my personal experience, but what do you think about that?
I do think that that emotional dysregulation is experienced more in women with ADHD, but I also think that it is important in men, and I think it's probably less thought about, just because we kind of think of emotion as part of something that is just a woman's thing. But I do think, men with ADHD also struggle with it a lot, especially because they feel like they have to suppress it a lot more. So I think it's something that we should look at. If I am not mistaken, I feel like I've read a paper on this. Barkley is a huge ADHD researcher.
No, I feel like because I've heard the name before, and I'm thinking I should definitely know who that is.
Russell Barkley.
But
Anyway, go on.
he talks about emotion dysregulation a lot, and he says that it should be part of the core ADHD criteria. I think there's, like you said, it's not just specific to ADHD, so it's hard to kind of separate that. But
So I think, well, I wanted to ask you two more questions, if I may. Two more questions. One is, one of the standard questions that we've got is what are the implications of your research for people with ADHD? But I think I want to ask that more specifically. What is the implications of your research for yourself at the age of 15? So if you go back, if you went back to the age of 15, what would you then tell yourself as a result of what you've done in terms of research?
so I think, this is quite emotional, I would say, because have because I'm in clinic now a few times a week. I kind of visit those emotions as a 15-year-old on a daily basis, because I speak to so many young people, teenagers, and see how they what they experience. And so I think I'm constantly reminded of this implication every time I go in. They feel, well, I felt completely misunderstood, um, and also not really, like, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know what to ask for, what help to ask for, what support to ask for. If, there's just so many questions, so much pressure, so much expectation, that I think if I knew, well, first of all, if I knew that women with ADHD existed, that would take a massive, a massive load off of me. I think that was one of the biggest things initially. I remember when I first got a diagnosis, I went and I searched on Google, ADHD, and I couldn't find anything that was, related to women and to girls. It was all surrounding, boys. Like, oh, boys tend to have ADHD, and they are very hyperactive and this. And I'm like, I don't relate it to this, and it's some things I do, some things I don't, and and I thought. I think as I got older and as I researched more and I looked into ADHD more, I realized that I do have ADHD. But up until then, I think there was so many questions, like, there must be something else wrong with me. There must be something else going on, because none, my symptoms and my experiences are not really matching with what I'm seeing on Google and what I'm seeing on these websites. And so, first of all, I think, we need to make girls and women feel understood, make them feel like their symptoms are being reflected in ADHD tools and screening tools, and that they're being taken seriously. Whether that be emotion dysregulation, whether that be rejection sensitivity, all of these things that really, really matter to girls with ADHD, and make them understand that, yes, this is something that you might experience as a girl with ADHD, and this is something that you can get support with and feel understood by clinicians, by parents, by teachers. So yeah, I think the understanding is the biggest thing, because you then know how to move forward. You know what to ask for help. And also, again, understanding of medication and support. So I think I was very, very afraid of medication. I think there was quite a big stigma surrounding it. I didn't really know what the types of medications there were, and when I was doing my research, I was like, you could have uh, like all of these side effects that were coming up, and it's obviously they come up as like very rare things that could happen. But I think when you do your own research and you search for my foot is hurting, you automatically have cancer. So it's just that kind of thing of like very, very you put, there's so much information out there and you don't really give that in a very neat and concise thing to a 15-year-old. That is very, very overwhelming. So yeah, I think that would be just being more yeah.
So what do you think is next for you? What's your next research question going to be?
So I technically have finished my data collection, so for my PhD. So now I'm pretty much writing up everything and analyzing everything, trying to publish everything. So the study that I've just finished, it basically is the final piece to this masking hypothesis. So, like I said before, we think that in primary school, when demands are low, masking is easier, or they don't tend to mask as much. When demands get higher in high school, in secondary school, that mask comes down, they start to struggle, and all of these things. We are trying to basically mimic that in a controlled environment by using QB test. So there is QB test for children, then there is QB test for adults. The QB test for children is 15 minutes long. It's a lot easier. The QB test for adults is 20 minutes long, and it's harder. I guess it's harder for children because it's not an age appropriate task. So we're basically trying to mimic this low demand, high demand in a controlled study. So we're basically trying to experimentally test our masking hypothesis. And our prediction is that young girls will be able to mask their ADHD difficulties under the low demand condition, so that when they do their child test, but they won't be able to mask their difficulties in the high demand condition, so when they do the adult test. Whereas, and that compares with boys that have similar problems, they will be challenged under both conditions.
That's smart.
That's really smart. I'm really interested
That's
to see
really interesting.
what you
We'll
find.
see.
So, thank you so much for we've really kind of put you through the kind of the mill here and shared all of your kind of wisdom and experience. And thank you so much. If people want to find out more or follow your work, where can they do that? If they've just listened and kind of, oh, this is interesting, but how do they find out more, or when your papers come out?
Yes, so I have a Twitter that I do not use, but I should. So I think for now I don't really know where to point you towards, because my Twitter is non-existent. It's very inactive. But when I do publish, I will. I mean, I have so much to publish. I really, really want to do it all. I think if I could publish everything by the end of my PhD, it would probably be around 10 papers with all of the data that I have. There's a lot of data.
You need to activate your Twitter.
Yeah. So I'll definitely start being more active on there once I start publishing, once I do it. I'm going to do a few conferences and things like that. So because it's inactive, I don't even know the name of it, so I wouldn't be able to tell you right now.
Really inactive. Well, I tell you what, we'll make sure. I'm committing ADHD UK to something, but we'll make sure when your papers come out, let us know, and we'll put it out on the ADHD UK, because I think the work you're doing is really, really important. As a clinician, I really want to start using those tools that you're talking about. I want to know what your data shows. The dog wants to do something, but yeah, no, I'm really, really excited to have heard about it, and I'm just really, really grateful to you for your time this evening.
Really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. I hope I made some sort of sense.
You did.
Many
Thank
sense.
you.
It's just us that lost it on occasion.
Yeah.